For 10,000 years, the warning signs waited in silence. They floated at the outer edge of a quiet solar system, drifting in perfect formation around the invisible boundary of the star's gravity. Each sign was enormous. Huge plates of ancient metal, larger than mountains, wide enough to cast shadows across entire fleets. No one alive remembered who had built them. Even the oldest civilizations in the galaxy only knew one thing about these signs. They had always been there. Across their surfaces, deep letters had been carved into the metal. The symbols were written in more than 400 languages. Some belonged to empires that had disappeared thousands of years ago. Others belonged to species that had gone extinct so long ago that their names were barely remembered. But the message was always the same. No matter the language, no matter the species, the meaning never changed. Do not enter this system. Do not disturb the world inside. Do not wake what sleeps here. Turn around. Live. Never return. For 10,000 years, every ship that reached this boundary had obeyed the warning. Until today. Commander Verkalos of the Galactic Dominion studied the nearest sign from the bridge of his flagship. His long gray head tilted slightly as the massive plate drifted across the main display window. The bridge was quiet. 46 other Dominion warships floated behind his flagship, forming a powerful fleet that stretched across thousands of kilometers of space. Weapons armed. Shields active. Engines humming with controlled power. His officers waited. Finally, Verkalos made a small dismissive sound. Ancient superstition, he said calmly. Then he gave the order. Move the fleet forward. The engines of 47 warships ignited together, glowing blue against the darkness as the fleet crossed the forbidden boundary. Behind them, the warning signs remained silent. Verkalos was not a reckless commander. In fact, he was known across the Dominion as a careful strategist. His career had been built on patience, logic, and precise planning. He had studied the historical records of this quarantine system. The warnings had been placed here near the end of an ancient era, long before the Galactic Dominion even existed. According to the archives, some forgotten civilization had declared the entire star system dangerous. But the details were vague, incomplete, almost mythical. To Verkalos, the explanation was simple. Fear. Old civilizations often exaggerated dangers they did not understand. Over thousands of years, those fears slowly turned into legends. Legends turned into rules. And eventually no one questioned them anymore. Verkalos had never been impressed by myths. He believed in facts. And the facts were very promising. Long-range Dominion scanners had recently detected extremely rich mineral deposits on the third planet of this system. Rare metals. Exotic elements. Materials that the Dominion desperately needed for its expanding colonies. A quiet, unclaimed world filled with valuable resources. The mission was simple. Scan the planet. Confirm the mineral deposits. Begin extraction operations. The ancient quarantine signs were nothing more than an obstacle. And obstacles were meant to be ignored. Third planet approaching, announced the navigation officer. The main display shifted. For a moment, the bridge fell silent. The planet was beautiful. Blue oceans covered most of its surface. Large green continents spread between swirling white clouds. Sunlight reflected gently across the atmosphere, making the world glow softly against the darkness of space. It looked peaceful. Too peaceful. Commander Verkalos studied it with mild curiosity. Begin orbital scans. Within seconds, the sensors returned their results. Mineral density charts appeared across the holographic display. Several regions across the continents showed strong readings. Exactly what the Dominion had hoped for. Verkalos examined the data carefully before selecting 3 locations. Uninhabited wilderness areas. Prepare test pulses, he ordered. His science officer, a small careful being named Pell, hesitated for a brief moment before speaking. Commander, she said quietly, the archive file regarding this system contains a warning about surface disturbance. Verkalos did not look at her. I have read the mission summary. Pell remained silent for a moment. Then she returned to her console. 3 Dominion warships rotated slightly in orbit. Energy built inside their weapon systems. The weapons were not designed for destruction. This was simply a geological test. A controlled pulse of energy would strike the surface and reveal the depth of the mineral deposits below. Standard procedure. Nothing dangerous. Fire. 3 bright flashes shot downward from orbit. Seconds later, the pulses struck the planet's surface. From space, the impacts looked insignificant. Tiny bursts of light in distant wilderness. Gone almost instantly. But on the surface of the planet, 10,000 kilometers away from the nearest impact site, A human farmer named Dale Hutchkins felt the ground move beneath his boots. He stopped walking. The dirt under his feet trembled once. Not like an earthquake. It felt different. Like something heavy had pushed down from the sky. Dale slowly looked up at the clear blue afternoon above his farm. There was nothing there. No clouds. No aircraft. Just quiet sky. He stared for several seconds. Then he turned around, walked back into his house, poured himself a cup of coffee and turned on the television. Within 3 hours, seismic stations across the planet had detected the strange impacts. Within 5 hours, military radar systems began tracking something unexpected in orbit. By the end of the day, every major government on Earth was asking the same question. What exactly was above their planet? Far above them, Commander Verkelos believed the mission was proceeding perfectly. He had no idea what he had just awakened. While the Dominion fleet calmly orbited above the planet, the world below was changing faster than anyone expected. At first, the reaction on Earth looked chaotic. Emergency meetings began almost immediately. Government leaders were pulled out of bed in the middle of the night. Military commanders rushed into secure rooms filled with glowing screens and satellite data. Strange objects had appeared in orbit. Large ones. Many of them. Radar systems across multiple countries were tracking the same formation of unknown spacecraft circling the planet far above the atmosphere. At first, no one spoke about aliens. But everyone was thinking it. Within hours, communication lines between nations that normally disagreed on everything were suddenly very busy. The problem in the sky was not something any single country could handle alone. And humanity had a long history of arguing about almost everything. But when something threatened the entire planet, people had a surprising habit of cooperating. By the end of the first day, a temporary organization had been formed. It was called the Unified Human Council. Representatives from dozens of nations gathered together in a single secure facility. They sat around a large table looking at the same orbital data. The same sensor readings. The same impossible situation. Two questions quickly became the focus of every discussion. First, what are those ships? Second, what do they want? While the council debated, Commander Verkelos had already moved on to the next step of his mission. Deploy a surface scout pod, he ordered. One small reconnaissance vessel separated from the flagship and began descending toward the planet below. Its mission was simple. Land quietly. Collect environmental samples. Scan the surrounding area. Then return. Nothing complicated. The pod entered Earth's atmosphere late in the afternoon. Its heat shields glowed briefly as it cut through the upper layers of air before slowing rapidly. Minutes later, it landed in a wide open field surrounded by tall grass and low hills. The landing site seemed perfect. Remote. Quiet. Uninhabited. The pod opened with a soft mechanical hiss. A small reconnaissance drone stepped out onto the ground. Its sensors activated immediately, scanning the air, the soil, and the distant horizon. Everything appeared calm. For 12 minutes, the drone worked without interruption. Then a cloud of dust appeared on the nearby road. A very old pickup truck bounced across the uneven dirt path toward the field. Inside the truck sat Dale Hutchkins. He had noticed the strange object land from the edge of his property. Curiosity had quickly replaced any sense of fear. Dale parked the truck a short distance away and stepped out slowly. The wind moved quietly through the tall grass. The small alien drone turned to face him. Its optical sensor focused directly on the approaching human. Dale walked forward until he was only a few meters away. Then he stopped. He crossed his arms and studied the strange machine standing in his field. For several seconds, neither of them moved. Finally, Dale spoke. His voice was calm, almost annoyed. "I don't know who sent you," he said slowly. "But you've got about 30 seconds to explain why you're standing in my field." The drone processed the statement. Its programming searched through thousands of possible responses. Hostile action protocols. Escape procedures. Stealth withdrawal strategies. But it had never been programmed to deal with something like this. A human standing calmly in front of it. Unarmed. Unafraid. And clearly irritated. The drone remained still. Dale waited a few seconds. Then he sighed. "All right," he muttered. "If you're not gonna talk, we're doing this the hard way." 2 hours later, a Dominion retrieval team arrived at the field. What they found confused them completely. The scout drone had been disabled. Not destroyed. Not damaged. Just restrained. It was zip-tied tightly to a wooden fence post near the edge of the field. Its sensors were still blinking steadily. The retrieval team stared at the scene in silence. One of them quietly recorded the situation in the mission log. Surface reconnaissance unit captured by local inhabitant. Back inside his house, Dale Hutchins sat at his kitchen table drinking coffee while watching an emergency broadcast on television. News anchors around the world were now openly discussing the alien fleet above Earth. For the first time in human history, the planet knew it was not alone. That evening, the Unified Human Council sent its first message to the fleet in orbit. The signal was transmitted on every communication frequency available. When the message reached the Dominion flagship, Science Officer Pell received it first. She translated the signal carefully. Then she carried the message to the commander's desk. Verkelos read it slowly. The message was surprisingly short. There were no dramatic threats. No emotional speeches. Just a calm statement. You have 24 hours to explain your presence in our system and the actions taken against our planet. This is not a request. We will be waiting. Commander Verkelos read the message twice. Then he gave a quiet laugh. Interesting, he said. He placed the message aside without responding. To him, the situation was very simple. The planet below was primitive. It had no space fleet. No orbital weapons. No technology capable of threatening a Dominion warship. Whatever these humans believed they could do, they were mistaken. But far away in the deepest archives of the Galactic Dominion capital, something very old had just awakened. An ancient artificial intelligence system suddenly activated after 12,000 years of silence. It had detected something impossible. Someone had entered the quarantine system. The AI reviewed the coordinates carefully. Then it sent a single automated message directly to Commander Verkelos's personal console. The message contained only one sentence. Commander, you have made a serious mistake. We are sorry for your fleet. Commander Verkelos did not see the warning message until the next morning. It had been sitting quietly on his console for almost 6 hours. The night on the flagship had been routine. Officers filed reports. Navigation teams updated orbital positions. Engineers checked the fleet systems. Everything looked normal. When Verkelos finally opened the message, he read it once. Then again. He leaned back slowly in his chair. The words were simple. Commander, you have made a serious mistake. We are sorry for your fleet. For a moment he considered the message. Then he shook his head slightly. It is just an old automated system, he said to himself. Ancient machines often reacted to outdated protocols. They did not understand that thousands of years had passed. Whatever the quarantine had been protecting, it surely did not matter anymore. Verkelos closed the message and walked back to the bridge. Science Officer Pell was waiting there. She had been waiting for him for several minutes. He noticed the quiet tension in her posture. What is it? He asked. Pell hesitated briefly before answering. Commander, I believe you should read the full archive file regarding this system. I have already read the mission summary. The full file is very different, she replied calmly. It contains historical details that may be important before we continue operations. Verkelos looked at her for a long moment. Finally he sighed. Send it to my console. Pell nodded and transmitted the archive file. But as the commander turned away, she already suspected he would not read it immediately. She was correct. Thousands of light years away in the capital city of the Galactic Dominion, the same archive file was already being studied very carefully. A young intelligence analyst named Saravias had discovered something strange. She had been reviewing routine system alerts when the ancient archive AI suddenly flagged a quarantine violation. At the same time, Commander Verkelos's progress report arrived from the fleet. Curious, Saravias cross-referenced the two records. Then she opened the full historical archive. The document was enormous. Thousands of pages of historical data, military reports, and diplomatic records. She made herself a warm drink and began reading. 3 hours later she finished. Her hands were slightly shaking. Without saying anything, she printed a copy of the file and walked directly to the office of Senior Archivist Dolan. He looked up from his desk as she entered. Saravias placed the thick document in front of him. Sir, she said quietly, you need to read this. 20 minutes later, Dolan was walking quickly toward the Dominion Senate chamber. He had not even stopped to put on his formal coat. An emergency session was called immediately. Senators filled the large circular chamber, their voices echoing through the tall halls as arguments began almost instantly. Many of the younger senators were irritated. The quarantine is ancient history, one of them insisted. The records are exaggerated myths. Our fleet in that system is one of the strongest in the Dominion. There is nothing on that planet that could threaten it. But across the chamber, the older senators remained very quiet. They did not argue. They did not interrupt. They simply waited. Eventually the room fell silent. At the center of the chamber sat the oldest senator in the Dominion, a thin, ancient figure named Vorith. He rarely spoke during public sessions. But now he slowly folded his hands together and looked around the chamber. Perhaps, he said calmly, it would be helpful if everyone understood exactly what the archive file describes. The room became completely silent. Vorith began reading. 12,000 years ago, he said slowly, the third planet in that quarantine system was not a primitive world. It was the home of a spacefaring civilization. The senators shifted uneasily in their seats. They had already developed interstellar travel, Vorith continued. They explored nearby star systems. They established trade routes. And they formed alliances with neighboring civilizations. The Dominion senators exchanged confused glances. None of this history had appeared in the mission summary. Vorith continued reading. This civilization fought 3 interstellar wars. In each war they were the smaller force. Their enemies had stronger fleets and more advanced technology. And in each war, he paused. The humans won. Murmurs spread across the chamber. Not easily, Vorith said. They suffered enormous losses. But every war ended the same way. The opposing civilization eventually asked for peace. The chamber grew quiet again. But Vorith had not reached the most important part yet. The Keth sovereignty, he continued, studied these wars carefully. They wanted to understand why humans were so difficult to defeat. They built military models and simulations. The results were unexpected. Vorith lifted his eyes from the archive. It was not superior technology. It was not greater numbers. It was something much simpler. He spoke the final line slowly. Humans do not stop. Silence filled the chamber. In every known species, Vorith explained, there is a breaking point. A moment when losses become too great. A moment when retreat becomes the logical choice. Every military model in the galaxy is built around this assumption. He paused again. But humans never reached that point. When they lost battles, they adapted. When their strategies failed, they changed them. When they were pushed to the edge of destruction. Vorith looked around the chamber. They became even more determined. The Keth sovereignty eventually launched a full war against them. The war lasted 400 years. Gasps spread across the chamber. Vorith finished the sentence quietly. The Keth sovereignty asked for peace. Not because they were defeated, but because they were exhausted. And the humans were not. Back on Earth, something strange had already begun. People around the world were waking up from strange dreams. Dreams filled with unfamiliar knowledge. One of them was Dr. Una Park, a retired aerospace engineer. At 3 in the morning she suddenly woke up. Her heart was racing. She walked slowly into her home office and picked up a marker. Then she began writing. Equations. Diagrams. Complex propulsion designs. She wrote for 2 hours without stopping. When she finally stepped back from the whiteboard, it was completely covered in calculations. Her hands were shaking. She recognized some of the mathematics. But the overall design was something she had never studied before. Something she had never seen. A design for a faster-than-light engine. She stared at the board in silence. Then she picked up her phone and called an old colleague. I think something has woken up inside my mind, she said quietly. And I don't think I'm the only one. She was right. Across the planet, thousands of people were waking up with the same feeling. Something ancient was returning. Something that had been sleeping inside humanity for 12,000 years. And now, it was beginning to wake up. 6 months after the first orbital bombardment, the planet below looked almost the same. The cities were still there. The oceans were still blue. The clouds still drifted slowly across the sky. But something inside the world had changed completely. There was a new energy everywhere. Factories worked day and night. Laboratories stayed bright with lights long after midnight. Construction sites appeared in deserts, mountains, and remote forests. Across the planet, people were building things they had never built before. Even the scientists who designed them sometimes could not fully explain where the ideas had come from. The knowledge simply appeared. Like memories returning after a very long sleep. On the Dominion flagship, Science Officer Pell watched the planet every morning from the observation deck. She had started doing it without really planning to. Each day she studied the new data coming from the fleet scanners. And each day the readings became more confusing. Energy production across the planet had increased dramatically. Large structures were appearing in remote locations. Flat reinforced platforms. Perfectly shaped. Pell studied the shapes carefully. They looked very familiar. Finally she realized what they were. Launch platforms. She immediately brought the data to Commander Verkelos. The commander studied the scans for a few seconds before shaking his head. "It is industrial expansion," he said. "The humans are developing their infrastructure." Pell spoke carefully. "Commander, the structures appear designed for spacecraft launches." Verkelos almost laughed. "Pell, these people do not even have basic space travel. They cannot threaten a Dominion fleet." Pell nodded quietly. But when she returned to her console, she began keeping a private record of everything the scanners detected. She had a feeling she might need the evidence later. Meanwhile, on Earth, the rate of innovation had become unbelievable. The Unified Human Council quickly realized that trying to control everything would slow progress. So they made a different decision. Instead of central control, they created an open global system. Anyone with a useful idea could submit it. Engineers, scientists, mechanics, factory workers, even students. If an idea worked, resources were immediately sent to develop it. Teams formed overnight. Designs improved every day. Arguments happened constantly. But the speed of progress was incredible. The alien scout drone captured by Dale Hutchkins became one of the most valuable discoveries on the planet. Scientists carefully dismantled it inside a high-security research facility. Every component was studied. Every system analyzed. At first the technology seemed impossible. But slowly the pieces began to make sense. The propulsion system. The shield generator. The weapon energy channels. Within 4 months, human engineers built their first working prototype engine. Within 5 months, they developed basic energy shields. By the end of the 6th month, they had built weapons capable of fighting in space. The mood in the research facilities changed. It was no longer just curiosity. Now it was preparation. Commander Verkelos finally received a message from the Dominion Senate. The message advised extreme caution. Several senior senators had read the ancient archive file. They strongly recommended avoiding further aggression against the planet. Verkelos considered the advice. Then he decided to send a demonstration. He selected a small group of human communication satellites orbiting far above the atmosphere. The order was simple. Destroy them. A precise energy strike cut through space. Within seconds the satellites were gone. 3 human technicians working aboard one of the satellites were killed instantly. On Earth the response came quickly. 4 hours later, a new message reached the Dominion fleet. Pell translated it and read it twice. The message named the 3 technicians who had died. Then it contained a single statement. The Unified Human Council now considers itself in a state of active conflict with the Galactic Dominion. No threats followed. No emotional language. Just calm certainty. Pell felt a quiet sense of fear when she finished reading it. The tone was completely calm. And that calmness was far more frightening than anger. 3 weeks later, the first human spacecraft launched. The ship had started its life as an ordinary cargo freighter. A large, heavy, very unattractive machine used for transporting equipment between ports. Engineers had stripped it down to the metal frame. They reinforced the hull using the new materials discovered during the global research effort. 6 large rail cannons were attached to the outside of the ship. The engines were installed in a space that was honestly too small for them. The result looked messy. Improvised. But it worked. The volunteer crew consisted of 11 people. Pilots, engineers, technicians, and 1 farmer from Montana, Dale Hutchkins. Since the day he had zip-tied an alien drone to a fence post, he had become unexpectedly famous. When the council asked if he wanted to join the first crew, he accepted immediately. Then he went home to feed his horses before packing his bag. Before launch, the crew decided to name the ship. They painted the name in large letters across the hull. The Stubborn Bastard. Several government officials objected to the name. The crew listened politely. Then they kept the name anyway. The Stubborn Bastard launched on a clear morning. The experimental engines worked perfectly. Within hours, the ship reached the outer edge of the solar system. 2 Dominion patrol ships immediately detected the approaching vessel. Their scanners identified it as a primitive human craft. The Dominion commander almost ignored it. But protocol required interception. The 2 warships moved toward the human vessel. What followed surprised everyone. The battle lasted 40 minutes. When it ended, both Dominion ships were drifting in space, their systems disabled. The Stubborn Bastard had taken damage, but it was still operational. Inside the ship, Dale Hutchkins leaned back from the targeting controls. He wiped sweat from his forehead and activated the communication channel to Earth. His message was short. 2 down. Then he smiled slightly. Tell them to send more. On the Dominion flagship, Commander Verkelos stared at the battle report in complete silence. Finally, 6 months after the mission began, he opened the full archive file. He read every page. When he finished, he sat quietly in his cabin for a very long time. Outside the window, the blue and green planets slowly rotated in the darkness. Now he understood why the warning signs had been placed at the edge of the system. And he understood something even worse. He had already triggered the condition that woke humanity up. 2 years after the first bombardment, the Galactic Dominion finally made its decision. The Senate had argued for weeks. Some of the elder senators still warned against direct conflict with humanity. They reminded the chamber about the ancient archive file and the long-forgotten wars described inside it. But the younger senators believed the situation was simple. Humans had built a fleet. But the Dominion had an empire. The final vote passed easily. The order was given. Across multiple star systems, Dominion fleets began moving toward a single destination. Warships gathered from distant sectors. Heavy cruisers, carrier ships, destroyers, massive command vessels. When they finally assembled at the edge of the quarantined solar system, the formation stretched across thousands of kilometers. The final count shocked even some Dominion officers. 4,200 warships. It was the largest military force the Dominion had assembled in 3,000 years. Supply ships moved along the outer edges of the formation. Medical vessels waited behind the battle lines. Troop carriers prepared for a possible planetary invasion. Military analysts reviewed the numbers carefully. Every projection predicted the same result. The battle would end quickly. But when the Dominion long-range scanners focused on the approaching human fleet, confusion spread across several bridges. The count was repeated 3 times. 600 ships. That was all the humans had brought. 600 against 4,200. Some Dominion commanders even wondered if the humans were planning a distraction. But the human fleet kept moving forward. Steady. Unafraid. Directly toward the Dominion formation. The battle began near the distant frozen edge of the solar system. Later, historians would call it the Battle of the Oort Line. It lasted 11 days. During the first 2 days, the Dominion's advantage was obvious. Their ships were larger. Their weapons were stronger. Several human vessels were destroyed in the opening exchanges. Dominion commanders watched the battle feeds with calm confidence. Everything was going according to the projections. The human fleet would collapse by the 3rd day. But the 3rd day came. And the human fleet did not retreat. Instead, something strange happened. The surviving ships reorganized themselves almost instantly. When a human command ship was destroyed, the surrounding vessels did not panic. They simply continued fighting. Each small group of ships adapted independently. They formed new attack patterns, new strategies, new formations. The Dominion battle models had never predicted something like this. By the 5th day, Dominion commanders stopped trusting their simulations. The numbers still favored them. But the battle no longer felt controlled. Every advantage they tried to use somehow turned against them. Human ships attacked from unexpected directions. When Dominion forces created a gap in the enemy formation, human ships immediately filled it. When Dominion ships isolated small groups of enemies, those groups fought harder instead of surrendering. The battle was becoming unpredictable. And the humans seemed to learn faster with every hour of combat. On the 6th day, the humans launched a dangerous strategy. Nearly 1/3 of their remaining ships began pulling away from the battlefield. Not in panic, but in a slow, controlled retreat. Dominion commanders believed they were witnessing the first sign of weakness. They ordered their fleets to pursue. Hundreds of Dominion warships followed the retreating human ships deeper into empty space. For several hours, the pursuit seemed successful. Then the trap closed. Human ships suddenly appeared from 6 different directions. They had been hiding in silent positions for hours. The pursuing Dominion fleet found itself completely surrounded. Weapons fire erupted from every side. Dozens of Dominion ships were destroyed within minutes. The battle had changed completely. By the 8th day, Commander Verkelos understood the terrible truth. His fleet was still large, still powerful, but it was no longer controlling the battle. Every move they made seemed to help the enemy. The humans were adapting faster than the Dominion commanders could respond. For the first time in his long military career, Verkelos felt something unfamiliar. Uncertainty. On the 10th day, he made one final attempt to change the outcome. If the human fleet could not be defeated directly, perhaps their home world could force them to retreat. He selected 12 of his fastest remaining warships. Their mission was simple. Bypass the battlefield. Travel directly to Earth. Launch a full orbital strike. The destruction of the human home world would force their fleet to abandon the battle. The 12 warships moved quickly through the solar system. Within hours, the blue planet filled their view screens. But what they found there shocked them. Earth had changed. In 2 years, the humans had transformed their world into a fortress. Orbital defense platforms surrounded the planet. Hidden weapon systems covered the surface. Powerful targeting arrays tracked every approaching ship. The Dominion vessels detected the defenses only seconds before the first weapons fired. The entire battle lasted 4 minutes. When it ended, all 12 warships were gone. Not damaged, not retreating. Completely destroyed. Back at the main battlefield, Commander Verkelos received the report in silence. He read it slowly. Then he asked his bridge crew to leave him alone. The bridge became quiet. Outside the window, distant stars filled the darkness. Verkelos thought about the ancient archive file. The 400-year war. The exhausted Keth sovereignty asking for peace. And the final line that historians had never fully understood. The humans had ended the war because they were bored. Now he finally understood what that meant. He opened a private communication channel to the Dominion Senate. He did not send a battle report. He did not include tactical data. He simply typed 4 words. Offer them the peace. Weeks later, negotiations began at a neutral space station. The Dominion delegation arrived first. More than 200 officials. Senators. Military advisors. Diplomats. Security teams. The human delegation arrived the next day. There were only 3 of them. They walked calmly into the meeting room and sat at the long table. One of them poured water into 3 glasses. Then they waited. Ambassador Chenwei spoke for humanity. He listened carefully to every proposal the Dominion presented. Then he calmly rejected every condition that limited human freedom. No restrictions on expansion. No limits on technology. No quarantine. After 3 days of negotiations, both sides signed the agreement. The UIT Accord. Humanity officially joined the galactic community. Not as a defeated civilization, but as an equal power. Months later, deep inside the ancient Dominion archives, the old AI system updated its records. The quarantine flag was removed. The status of the species was changed. Then the system wrote the final note in the file. Species human. Classification, apex. Diplomatic status, ally. And below it, a message for any future civilizations that might encounter humanity. Congratulations. You have awakened one of the most dangerous species in the universe. Fortunately for you, they would rather shake your hand than destroy you.